I was just reading Seneca's Letters from a Stoic, as one does, and I started thinking about what might Stoics say about modern day politicians. In this video, I want to try and answer the question, does being a Stoic make a good politician? I'll be analysing different quotes that I pulled from Seneca's Letters from a Stoic and seeing how the traits and characteristics described in those quotes can be applied to politicians and whether a Stoic would make a good politician in the modern day. I'm going to start with a quote that says, "For them, ruling was a service, not an exercise of royalty, them being leaders." How I interpreted this quote is that a leader, and in this case a Stoic politician, will aim to serve the people first and put themselves second. They see their time and power as an opportunity to do an act of service towards the people in their civilization instead of an opportunity to flaunt their wealth and power and use the money from the government to boost their own reputation and live like royalty. I think this really neatly applies to the modern day of the whole argument of preventing corruption is that we have to trust our political leaders will not use the money from the government to fund their own lifestyles, but will truly be using the money that they get from the government to help the people, so putting the people first. I mean, this is literally the first three words of the US Constitution. We the people! It's putting forward the idea that a politician lives to serve US citizens and put US citizens first. So an example of a politician that does this in the real world should really be any politician who swears by the Constitution and promises to put the people first and not be corrupt. The Stoic trait number one of serving the people first, we can say would equal a good politician. This is a politician who makes sure that their primary goal is to serve the people of their civilization and they will not fall into the traps of corruption. The next quote I found is about the willingness to give up power when it's time. The quote goes, "Virtue is held too cheap by the man who counts his body too dear. We should cherish the body with the greatest care, but we should also be prepared when reason, self-respect, and duty demand the sacrifice to deliver it even to the flames." Wow. What I interpret this quote as saying is that a Stoic can love and care for themselves, but they should be prepared to sacrifice themselves if that's what duty, self-respect, and reason calls for. So it's pretty easy to imagine what this might look like in a politician. A Stoic politician would be prepared to give up their career if that's what self-respect, reason, and duty ask them to do. We have some great examples of this from throughout history, like George Washington actually stepping down after 2 terms, Nelson Mandela stepping down, or even whistleblowers who are prepared to sacrifice their careers when they realize that that's what duty, moral obligations, or reason asks them to do. And the opposite of this would be tyrants who will hold on to their power no matter what.
I am the king!
There is a limitation to this in that we can't always assume one knows what is dutiful, their moral obligation, and so tyrants might think that they're making the right decision by holding on to their power. For example, if you asked Maduro, "Hey, do you think that you should step down and relinquish your power because it's the right thing to do?" he could very well turn around and say, "Well, I don't think it's the right thing to do for X, Y, and Z reason." So that's a huge limitation with this, is that we have to assume the politician realizes that it's the right thing for them to step down. Even with this limitation, I think that we can say Stoic trait number 2, which is the willingness to give up power, makes a good politician. The next Stoic trait I identified was the ability to separate the personal and the professional. So the quote I have here is, "That which annoys us does not necessarily injure us, but we are driven into wild rage by our luxurious lives." A really important part, if not the most important part of being a Stoic, is thinking rationally and not acting acting out of emotions. And so following this quote here, a Stoic should be able to differentiate between personal slights and real injustices that they might be facing. And to do this, they can't act out of emotion, exact revenge out of emotion. They need to be able to think rationally. So a Stoic politician would be able to successfully differentiate between personal slights and political maneuvers. I view this as a politician who would not lash out at critics or view dissent as a form of betrayal, rather part of the natural political process. An example of a politician who doesn't do this is Putin, who persecuted Alexei Navalny, his most famous critic. Following this, we might see a Stoic politician as someone who's able to distinguish between their personal life and their political life. If they've received negative comments in their political life, they won't take it personally.
What are my nicknames?
Wicked Witch of the West Wing, Veep Throat, Voldemire, Dickless Van Dyke, Tawdry Hepburn.
They were just jealous. Remember that?
They
Yes.
called you Goofy Smile.
Well, it's
Well,
not
that
good.
was-
But there could be a limitation here. A politician who really distinguishes between personal and political life and doesn't allow themselves to get emotional or upset over their political conversations and causes might be seen as too cold and like someone who doesn't really care about their political life and work. Naturally, I think people like to see some emotion in their politicians, and so a politician who is too rational and level-headed might fail to inspire the masses. Stoic trait 3, the ability to separate between the personal and the political life, might make a good politician. But this is where I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. This leads into the next quote I found, which is about only seeking punishment when it's just to do so. By finding fault, they seize upon opportunities to do harm. They insist that they have received injuries in order that they may inflict them. That is to say, a Stoic will only exact punishment if it's really just to do so, whereas others may seek out reasons and opportunities to exact punishment and hurt just because they want to. A non-Stoic may fabricate or exaggerate certain situations in order to justify themselves exacting punishment even if it didn't really warrant that reaction. So what this might look like in politics is a politician who's not a Stoic might make themselves out to be a victim in a situation or really exaggerate a situation in order to justify exacting punishment. Whereas a Stoic politician would only exact punishment if it was really just and fair to do so. So we can say that upholding Stoic trait number 4, which is only exacting punishment when it is just to do so, would make a good politician. But on the topic of punishment, this leads into the next trait I identified, which is a Stoic would err on the side of forgiveness over punishment. The quote I found was, "In this balancing of benefits and injuries, the good man will, to be sure, judge with the highest degree of fairness, but he will incline towards the side of the benefit. He will turn more readily in this direction." A Stoic will always judge actions rationally, but will err on the side of forgiveness. So in politics, this could translate into forgiveness-based diplomacy, rehabilitative justice, or generous social policies. That is, rather than purely punitive policies. But there is a limitation to this. Politicians who are seen as being too forgiving might end up being seen as being too soft. If they are always prioritizing benefit over strict justice, this could lead to appeasement over accountability. A real-world example of this could be Churchill and Chamberlain in World War II. In that moment, the world may have benefited more from Churchill's more strict approach to World War II than Chamberlain's more forgiving policy. Sometimes being tough is necessary. So Stoic trait number 5 of erring on the side of forgiveness over punishment might sometimes make a good politician, but also largely depends on the time and the circumstances, in that sometimes we do need that strong and strict punishment and policy. This leads to the final trait I identified, which is hesitance towards war crimes. So the quote I found reads, "We are mad, not only individually but nationally. We check manslaughter and isolated murders, but what of war and the much vaunted crime of slaughtering whole peoples? The cruelties are practiced in accordance with acts of Senate and popular assembly, and the public is bidden to do that which is forbidden to the individual." Like, what a quote. What a quote. So the analysis of this one is pretty straightforward, of that sometimes governments will justify acts like killing during war, and individuals are punished for those very same actions. There's this moral inconsistency there. And so we could say that a Stoic politician would reject this moral hypocrisy and focus on universal justice.
I wish for world peace.
Sorry about the Falklands, old boy.
Oh, forget it. We kind of knew they were yours. Come on, people now. Smile on your brother. Everybody get together.
But, of course, is this too idealistic? Is it actually possible to have a world where there is no war and no war crime? So Stoic trait number 6, this hesitance towards war crimes, would maybe make a good politician. It would in this idealistic sense, but in the real world, in real politic, is it actually possible to be a political leader without being prepared to commit war crimes if that's what your country calls for? So on that really wonderful and positive and uplifting note, those were my thoughts when reading Letters from a Stoic. I thought there were some great connections between what Stoics were saying and real world politics today. So I'd be curious if you watch this video to hear your thoughts on if you think being a Stoic would make a good politician or not.